The British Australian community calls on the Coalition to offer Australians a real alternative to the disastrous immigration policies of the last several decades, inflicted by both Labor and Coalition governments. In his budget reply speech of 16th May 2024, Mr Dutton broke the long period of bipartisanship on immigration policy, the bipartisanship that Bob Hawke admitted allowed governments to turn a relatively homogeneous, united nation into a diverse, divided one. Dutton called for a 25% reduction in the permanent settlement intake. He was appealing to a country that is awakening to the uneasy realisation that it is being transformed through mass migration. Mr Dutton must have known that he would be attacked by the usual suspects. For example, his interview by the ABC's 7:30 anchor, Sarah Ferguson, immediately following his budget reply speech, was a textbook study in unprofessional, biased, badgering journalism.
Skills that you're talking about, then I think we've got bigger problems than we realise. So
but we're talking about people overseas. We're talking about, I understand that that's a training question. That's a question about training, but obviously there's a lag. In this case, we're talking about industries that need a trained workforce right now.
But I mean, listen to the point you're making, which doesn't make any sense. You've got...
The following Sunday, in the ABC's Insider programme, the senior political reporter for 7:30, Laura Tingle, continued this ideological attack against Dutton. She steadfastly refused to admit that massive immigration strains the supply of housing. On the same Insiders programme, Treasurer Jim Chalmers adopted the same absurd position as Tingle, criticising a straw-man version of Mr Dutton's policy. It is clear that the Labor Party continues to hitch its political strategy to permanent mass non-European immigration with no concern or admission that it is doing harm. The BAC praises Mr Dutton for his courage and leadership in breaking with bipartisanship on immigration, though we also note that the changes he promises are insufficient and overdue by several decades. We can only guess the pressure Mr Dutton is under, but it is vital that immigration policy be put on a rational and sustainable footing. The country desperately needs principled reform. To instill greater confidence, Mr Dutton should put his policies in historical context. The disgraceful fact is that the two major parties have colluded to avoid giving Australians a say in their children's demographic destiny. If the Liberal or Labor parties had allowed an informed choice, Anglo-Australians would have voted against becoming a minority in their own country. Though not personally responsible for most of the harm done, Mr Dutton should apologise on behalf of the coalition parties for their appalling errors on immigration. From Malcolm Fraser to John Howard, Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison, the LNP has consistently failed to uphold reasonable policies on this issue. The apology must be specific and contrite, avoiding all vagueness and dissembling. It must specify the errors, the excessive numbers, the measures taken to circumvent democratic process, the harm done by rising diversity, especially the loss of cohesion, which is occurring despite the innocence of most immigrants. To stand any chance of redeeming his party, of making it credible on immigration, there needs to be a precise and fulsome deconstruction of the lies and deception that have facilitated replacement-level immigration since the 1970s. There has been a pattern of excessive intakes and failure to keep diversity within safe limits by granting permanent visas mostly to applicants of European Christian descent. This has happened because fundamentally the Liberal leadership became ideologically alienated from their own nation, beholden to big business and minority lobbies, and failed to respect the democratic will of the Australian people on this matter. They have ridden roughshod over our legitimate aspirations to retain national identity and keep diversity to a safe, low level. In addition, Mr Dutton's policy should be strengthened to cut immigration much further and make the cuts permanent. Indeed, should he become Prime Minister, he should initiate the orderly remigration of recent arrivals wishing to return to their homelands, as recommended by One Nation Senator Malcolm Roberts. To accomplish that goal, the British Australian community recommends establishing a Department of Emigration responsible for managing the diplomatic and logistical dimensions of mass negative migration. The present crisis goes far beyond the shortage of housing. Infrastructure in general is overstretched, from roads and public transport to hospitals and schools. More importantly, ethno-religious diversity is harming identity and social cohesion. Diversity is becoming one of Australia's greatest weaknesses. It is a good thing that Mr. Dutton expressed concern about declining social cohesion and pointed to a disturbing rise in anti-Semitism. Indeed, the hatreds fermented by foreign wars are being expressed on these shores. Mr. Dutton is right to condemn that. However, he failed to admit that this decline in social cohesion is due to reckless immigration policies enacted or approved by his own party over the last half-century. He should adopt immigration policies designed to cap and reduce ethnic diversity in Australia. Mr. Dutton should also have condemned rising Anglophobia, which includes hatred of the traditional Australian nation. This has become a form of institutional racism common within our schools and universities. Mr. Dutton should declare this to be unacceptable. He should commit the next coalition government to reforming the multicultural system so that it includes a dignified place for Anglo-Celtic Australians. He should promise to take the necessary measures to stop school curricula from spreading malicious lies about Australia's history. Institutional Anglophobia is the result of a reverse ethnic hierarchy enforced by leftist elites and their minority clients. Anglo-Australians have been defamed and their concerns silenced by UN-sponsored human rights agencies and corrupted school curricula. Peter Dutton should explain the situation as it is to the Australian people and declare it to be unacceptable. He should begin to right the wrongs of previous Liberal administrations. For example, by promising to return ethnic policy, immigration and multiculturalism, to a democratic footing. To that end, the government should provide a public internet portal showing important information concerning immigration and demographics, including the crime and employment rates of Australia's many ethnic groups. At the next election, Australians should direct their votes to candidates from any party who advocate a serious and permanent reduction in immigration, or who are in favour of providing government assistance for recent arrivals wishing to re-migrate to their homelands.
This video has been proudly produced by the British Australian community.